This evening, we have the honor of welcoming artist Josh Simpson. I understand that some of you are already fans of his work. To that point, we would ask that if you already have one of Mr. Simpson's creations, to take a step back and allow others to appreciate his work as well. One planet should be enough for everyone, or anyone, I should say. So, Josh Simpson is a self-taught glass artist whose vibrantly colored vessels and planet sculptures are often inspired by his fascination with the workings of the universe and astrophysical concepts such as black holes, dark matter, and how gravity warps the space-time continuum. A pioneer of the American studio glass movement of the 1970s, Simpson has spent more than half a century inventing new glass formulas and making objects that express his fascination with color, form, pattern, complexity, and the natural world, especially the night sky and deep space. His work is held in the permanent collection of the Corning Museum of Glass, the Smithsonian's Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Museum of Decorative Arts in Prague, and the Glass Museum in Lviv, Ukraine, among many others. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Josh Simpson.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Hi, can you guys hear me? I'm Josh Simpson, and I am a glassblower, and I've been a glassblower for more than 50 years now, and glass is so amazing. It has held my attention for all that time. And I'm going to show you some slides, and you can just watch and hopefully enjoy it. Glass itself, glass is an alchemic blend of sand and metallic oxides combined with extraordinary blinding heat. The result is this material that flows and drips like honey. When it's hot, glass is alive. It moves gracefully and inexorably in response to gravity and centripetal force. It possesses an inner light and transcendent radiant heat that make it simultaneously one of the most fascinating and one of the most frustrating materials for an artist to work with. Glass can be composed in an incredible variety of colors. And it's hard to imagine that you're just taking sand and other minerals mined from the earth and then making this wonderful material that can have so many colors. Glass is one of the only materials that I know of where even its edges and its shadows can have vibrant color. When I started to blow glass 54 years ago, I thought the most difficult thing that I could ever do was to make a wine goblet. And so that's what I started doing. And that, for example, is a pair of perfectly matched ruby wine goblets. And that's when I started. But as I went along, I learned more and more about how to do it. In the beginning, I built my own studio. It was this little studio that was 12 feet by 12 feet by 12 feet tall. It was very primitive. But my home where I lived in northern Vermont was also pretty primitive. I sewed together canvas and lived in a teepee for several years while I was building and working on my studio. But during that time, I started to develop and work on trying to figure out how to make color in molten glass. And one of the ways and one of the things I played with was putting silver in my glass. And eventually, I learned how to do this sort of blue color that reminds me, at least, of a starry night sky or maybe of an ocean if you're looking down at an ocean that's stormy. And those goblets that I made suddenly took off. People began to buy them. And Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter in the White House, Jimmy Carter, who died a week ago, Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind used my wine goblets in the White House in the 1970s, this from 1997. And the Corning Museum of Glass, which is a very famous museum in Western New York State, also chose my goblets to be part of an important international show. And from there was a magazine back then called Life magazine that nobody looked at the internet because there was no internet. People read Time magazine and Life magazine. And anyway, so I ended up moving here to Shelburne Falls. And this is where the story kind of gets interesting, because are any of you 8th graders? I owe you guys a huge, huge debt of gratitude, because I'll tell you the rest of the story, all right? I moved to Shelburne Falls, and actually I can see the lights of your ski lift or your ski run from my kitchen window at night. So I moved here. Now my studio is like this. It's probably one of the finest glass studios in the world. I have solar panels. And what I love about this part of the world is that we have beautiful night skies where we can watch the heavens. And were any of you able to see the Aurora Borealis months ago? Anyway, it's incredible to look at the sky. But how 8th graders changed my life is that when I first moved to this farm, one of the first people that ever visited me was a school teacher. And I showed her my glass studio, and she said, "Would you be willing to demonstrate glassmaking to all the 8th graders in Franklin County?" And I readily agreed, not realizing at the time that there were actually zillions of 8th graders. And so what I ended up inadvertently doing was agreeing to have a bunch of 8th graders in my studio every Wednesday afternoon for months. And during that time, 8th graders, I learned something really important about 8th graders. They are not willing to suffer any boredom in their lives whatsoever. They were not the least bit interested in me making wine goblets or vases or bottles or bowls or paperweights or plates, but they were kind of fascinated when I started making marbles for them, little marbles with swirls and things like that. And one night before they came, because they came every Wednesday for January, February, March, April, and May, I thought about this photograph that the Apollo astronauts had taken of the Earth as they rounded the moon. And in this photograph, you realize that the Earth, which seems so vast and limitless to us, is really only just as big as a tiny blue marble floating in the black void of space. And so the next day, instead of making just any old marble for these kids, I began to make planets. And planets made of glass, not the Earth, but the planets made of glass, were really fun for me because it allowed me to try many different techniques that I hadn't tried before, and I learned to make new colors and new techniques. And all of these are pictures, close-ups of little planets that I do. And planets have been such an important part of my work. I also make lots of other things, but planets are really cool because they sort of transcend age and religion and gender, and people who are young and old and of different faiths and different cultures all seem to get it. They all love them. They're really fun. And what's really amazing is that basically all primates seem to love them. So today, my work is shown in museums around the world. This is at the Springfield Museum close by. This is at the Corning Museum of Glass with a Tiffany window behind. This is at the Smithsonian's gallery in Washington, D.C. And this is a museum in Yokohama, Japan, the Josh Simpson Sphere Museum. Now, I want to show you this quick photo of a little goblet. It's only about 1.5 inches tall, and it's very unassuming. But for the 17th and 18th century, archaeologists around the world couldn't figure out what they were used for. They were found throughout the Middle East, all over the Middle East. There were these little things, and nobody knew what they were for. Okay, so now I'm going to also show you a little bit of technique. This is one of my planets, and in the center there, well, now there's a little thing there. I had a laser pointer, but I left it over there. It's just a little bead shape, but I want to show you how I make that. Just to show you, there's so many details inside my planets, but I'll just show you this one, how to make this one thing. And what I do is I start with some white glass that I've made. I get it really hot, and I drip it through 2 steel rolls to make a long, flat piece of essentially stained glass, only it's solid white. And it's hot, really hot, 2,000 degrees or more. And it has to be cooled slowly, picked up carefully with gloves. And it has to cool there overnight. And the next day, I cut that sheet of white glass into rectangular strips, and then I heat them up. And I'll just show these slides. At any rate, archaeologists, thinking about that little goblet form, archaeologists couldn't figure out what they were used for, whether they were used for medicinal reasons or for religious reasons or for makeup for people. No one knew what they were for, but they had a million guesses. But one of my friends was traveling in Herat, Afghanistan, and found a glassmaker who was actually making those little goblets. And you know what they were used for? I'll tell you in a minute. So what I've done is taken the white glass and I've made a little wedge that has to cool. And then I take I make a bunch of them, and I make sort of a pie shape with them. And then I wire that up to hold it together with pieces of wire and heat it up to 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty hot. Pick it up on the end of a blowpipe or on the end of a steel rod, heat it up to fuse the glass together. And I'm doing just that, cutting the wire off, heating it up, shaping it. I shape it with a piece of wet newspaper, usually the Wall Street Journal, and which has, it's wonderful because it absorbs water, and you can actually touch the glass with this wet newspaper. Eventually, I get it hot enough so that by hanging it up, and by heating it a little bit more with a torch, this torch is called Fluffy, and I heat it up and stretch it out. And eventually, I take a little piece of that, just 6 inches or so, even though I stretched it 2 or 3 feet. I put that away and save it for later. But I save a little piece, 6 inches or so, get that hot, and then start to shape it, and I attach a piece of glass to the bottom of it that's attached to a drill at one end, and I stretch it like taffy and twist it at the same time, which makes it incredibly complex design. Just after I finish it, it's still super hot, so I have to cool it in a cooling oven, and a day or two later, it's cool enough to touch, and that's what it looks like. And so you might wonder what I do with it next. I put it into a small kiln, bring it up to 1,000 degrees or so, pick it up on the end of a pipe or on a steel rod, and now I'm going to form it using a little reheating oven, and I'll form it. I get it super hot on the end, and I'll cut off a little end of it that will become a little bead, then becomes the tiniest, smallest little part of one of my planets. So making planets, and I make lots of these designs because they're fun to do, and they're really complicated, and they're really colorful, and they're so minute that when you look at them, you almost need a microscope to see what's going on. And now I'll show you how I actually make one of my planets. And I take a steel rod, heat it up the end, gather glass out of my furnace, and then I pick up pieces that I've made ahead of time, in the same way that I just made that little spaceship bead. And I gather clear glass over it, and then I pick the bead that I just made, or I think of it as an aquatic creature or as a spaceship. I pick that up with a pair of tweezers, and I place it in just where I want it, inside the planet, or actually on the outside of the planet right now. I heat that up, gather more clear glass over it, and I wish I could have a furnace here, because if the furnace were sitting here in the middle of the stage, you'd hear this, just this intense roar of combustion. But if I opened the door, you would immediately feel this blast of heat come out. It is so hot that if you, even when I'm working with a piece of glass, if I have my arm 8 inches away from the glass and I count to 5, my clothes will catch on fire. So that's how hot it is. It's really, if I open the door of the furnace, you would immediately just step back. So I then take a piece of apple wood that's been soaked in water, and I begin to shape this planet. And sometimes I heat it with a torch. And then it gets taken off the blowpipe and cooled. So it turns out that my friend was in Herat, Afghanistan, and saw a glassblower making this little goblet. And he asked him what it was for. And the glassblower just pointed up to a bird cage. And in the bird cage were 2 of these, one for water and one for seeds for the birds. And so it turns out that in the 1,000 years ago, caged birds were kept throughout the Middle East, but none of the cages, which were made of reeds or wood, none of the cages survived, but all the little glass containers survived. So the archaeologists, who for 200 years had come up with all these crazy reasons why these existed, were all wrong. And I love that fact. And I thought, you know, I'm making these planets. Maybe I should hide my planets. Maybe I should start to hide them for archaeologists to someday find. And let's see if I can get my computer to connect again. So in the beginning, I hid my planets locally in Shelburne Falls or around here in the valley. And they're weird. Glass objects can last for thousands of years underground or just sitting out. In fact, most of the glass that's in museums around the world, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, the ancient Roman glass from 2,500 or 3,000 years ago was not saved by collectors. It was dug up by archaeologists. And so I thought, I'll just hide my work around, and maybe someday someone will find it. It's a non-transactional gift. It's just a gift. They're not signed. They have just a little infinity symbol on the bottom. And if somebody finds one, they won't know who made it. They won't know anything about it. But ideally, it will be just as fascinating to somebody 50 or 100 or 1,000 years from now as it is today. So there may be a few planets hidden around the campus. And so they are also hidden in Peru and in castles in France. And years ago, I was out west in Utah and Colorado, and I came upon this enormous, great canyon. And I climbed up the side of this canyon wall, and I hid a planet way up high on this mountainside. And also, I didn't go here, but one of my friends hid this. There apparently is a wall somewhere, and I'm not sure where it is. It's in wherever it is, and this is a nice home for somebody, maybe in Texas or somewhere like that. And somebody called it the Taj Mahal, but it might be. And this is Machu Picchu. I thought, if you want archaeologists to find your planets, you should hide planets where archaeologists go. And so I started hiding planets in archaeological sites like Machu Picchu and Palenque. And then here, this is my wife and son with the ambassador to Iceland, Carol Van Voorst, hiding a planet or dropping a planet in the gulf between the European and North American tectonic plates in Iceland. And I hid this last summer. My wife and I flew up to Svalbard, Norway, which is the most northern airport in the world above the Arctic Circle. And we went climbing on glaciers and hiding planets along the way. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in northern Canada, in Churchill, Canada, and I hid planets for polar bears to find. I don't know if you can see it down there. And over time, many of my friends and people that I've known have taken planets, in this case, to the North Pole. Actually, 2 different ships have taken planets to the North Pole. And this is a planet at the South Pole. And lots of planets have been hidden underwater. In this case, I was hiding one. Actually, it's sometimes scary. I've been hiding them in caves underwater, but really deep, hiding them deep underwater. This is a research submarine called the Alvin, and the folks at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts have been hiding planets for, 30 years underwater. Whenever they go on a research dive, they take them along. Another underwater researcher, a man named Robert Ballard, has been taking planets with him with his underwater remote vehicle. And I just thought I'd show you this. This is a diver underneath the ice in Antarctica. That's actually sea ice. That's in salt water, so it's pretty cold. And of course, you can't ignore mountains. And this is Nova Pisto Mountain in Peru, and the base camp at Mount Everest. And it takes a lot of strength and courage, actually, to take one of these planets up. The guys that climb Mount Everest cut off their toothbrushes, so they're little short sticks, because they don't want to carry the extra weight of the brush. So carrying a planet all the way up is a challenge. This is K2 Mountain. But I really learned a lot and went much further when I learned how to fly. So I installed a tiny little window in my airplane that I can open while I'm in flight and throw planets out. And so have you ever tried to break a marble? If they land on something soft, they're going to be fine. So I love this picture because it's just north of the school here. It's just due north on a 010 heading from the Turners Falls Airport. It's just all forest, and so there are planets in that forest, and in Maine, and in all over the place. Thanks to my ability. Actually, they're even in New Zealand, and because I got to fly there. But then I realized it's one thing to have archaeologists have your work, but what would be really cool is if you get your work in museums. I thought the best way to get my work in a museum would be to hide my work in a museum. And so this is the Corning Museum of Glass. This is like the ultimate place for glass in the world. And this is the director's office on a Sunday morning, and I buried a planet outside his window. And wouldn't you know, he found it. And it says, this planet was excavated at the museum and is identified as the work of Josh Simpson. It is one of thousands of planets that Simpson has placed around the globe in his Infinity Project. So I thought I'd also introduce you to my wife. This is my wife, Katie Coleman. Katie had the most amazing luck to apply for a job that was almost impossible to get. And so, but she applied anyway. She did it. She applied, and out of 2,700 applicants, they chose 3 women and 16 men. In 1992, she was chosen to be a NASA astronaut. And so this is my wife, Katie, getting ready for her last flight, which was with the Russians, and she's dressed in her Sokol spacesuit and now getting aboard the rocket. And she went to the space station where she lived for 6 months. And here she is on the planet. I figured, actually, it'd be good to have planets in outer space, too. So Katie brought them with her. Actually, other astronauts have brought them also. And so I'll just show you give you a few more hints of where they might be around here on the campus. And I am donating a copy of this new book called Hide One, Keep One. It's about my infinity project. So I actually brought 2 books tonight to give the school for the library so you can read more about the infinity project. And so that's my glass. You guys were super patient to listen to all of that, and I don't know if anybody has any questions. I think, is there somebody with a mic or something like that?
Have you ever accidentally lit yourself on fire when opening up your furnace?
Hell yeah. Yeah, actually, when we're doing big pieces, I actually assign one person in the studio to watch me, because I wear wool and Kevlar. Kevlar doesn't burn, but the wool underneath can burn. And so sometimes when I'm working, I'll smell, or somebody will smell smoke. Somebody is burning in the room, and oftentimes it is me. And so there's one person assigned to just keep an eye on me and put me out if I catch fire. Oh, that's a good question. We'll never know, will we? All right, I have to answer that honestly. The question was, what happens if somebody gets hurt when I throw a marble out of the window of the airplane? And I want to assure you right now that I've never dropped one over Eaglebrook. But I also am absolutely certain where I am so out of where humanity is when I drop them, that I'm certain they're landing in the ocean or in a forest, or not where there are people. Go ahead.
You said on your planets you made like an infinity symbol. How do you carve that?
Oh, actually, you would love it. I have a dental drill, like one of those things that make that that makes you crazy. Anyway, it's a little dental drill, and I can engrave an infinity symbol, or I can the pieces that I sell have my signature engraved with a serial number. Go ahead.
So will the polar bear die if they eat the marble?
Will
the polar bear die if they eat?
No, and polar bears don't eat rocks either. So it. But ideally, no. Polar bears are amazing creatures. You think they're like these white, cuddly things. They are big. They're huge creatures. If I were standing here and there was a polar bear above me, I wouldn't even reach underneath his arm. They stand 9 feet tall. They weigh 1,400 pounds, and they are big, and they are super scary, and they are happy to eat people. I don't know if people would make them sick, but maybe not. Next question.
How many times difference between your largest and smallest planet that you ever made are in weight and size?
Okay. The ones mostly that are hidden around the campus are just barely 2 inches in diameter, and I don't know what they weigh, a couple of ounces. But larger ones, this one is actually, I'm donating to the school because it doesn't have quite the right shape, but it's going to be built. It's going to be put into a wall somewhere in your new building, but the largest one, I got commissioned by the Corning Museum of Glass to make the world's largest sphere, and I made a planet that doesn't sound that large. It was 13.5 inches in diameter, but it weighed 107 pounds. I think the largest one I ever did was 130 pounds. That doesn't maybe sound like very much, but if you can imagine 130 pounds of molten liquid glass, if you put it on the stage here, it would just blow up in flame. And it's on the end of a long pipe, and it's heavy. So it's 130 pounds out here. It's really heavy. Yeah.
What's your favorite place that you've left a model before?
There have been so many cool places. I kind of like, I hid one in the state dining room of the White House while my wife distracted the Secret Service people. And because everybody wants to talk to an astronaut, right? So she rounded up the Secret Service guys, and she was showing them or doing something. And while she did that, I went behind them and hid one in the state dining room. I also hid one at Castel Gandolfo, which is the summer home of the Pope. And she did the same thing. There are these mean hombres, these Swiss guard, who have pikes and hatchets and stuff. And she distracted those guys while I hid a planet right behind the Pope.
How long does it typically take you to create a planet?
That is easy to answer. A planet takes about an hour and 45 years. And you think I'm kidding, but it's taken me a lifetime to figure out all the techniques and all the things that I do. So one thing, I make all those, like just to make that little spaceship that I showed you, that little bead, that took the better part of a day. And actually it was over many days, because I had to heat the glass once, cut it, cool it, heat it again, cut it, cool it, twist it. And so each one of those spaceships took actually probably hours, even though it's tiny. And so it's very hard to say exactly how long. When we're putting them together, when we put all the parts together, I do it as quickly as I can because it is so hot. So anywhere from half an hour to make a small one to 4 or 5 hours to make a really big one. That's just putting the pieces together. If you add all the time to make all those pieces, I don't know how long. Who's next?
Why do you call it the Infinity Project? Why do you keep the Infinity Project?
Well, I call it the Infinity Project because glass is, in Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, they found glass. That's from 2,600 years ago. That's a long time. And glass has been made for at least 3,000 years. And much of that glass, especially the oldest glass, wasn't collected by museums or saved. It was buried in the earth for what seems like infinity. And here it is today. It is possible that if you guys don't find one or more of the planets that are hidden on your campus, that it may be found by somebody years from now, or you may grow up and have kids and have one of your children come to this school and they might find it. So that's why I call it the infinity. It's just a long-term thing. That's why.
Has anybody ever found one and then brought it back to you?
Actually, that's happened a couple times. Once I left, I was flying my airplane in western Pennsylvania, and I landed and spent a day there, and then I left a planet where I had parked my plane in the grass part of the airport. And then when I started the airplane and taxied to get permission from air traffic control to depart the airport, and then suddenly air traffic control in Pittsburgh, 60 miles away, called and said, 7613 Papa, hold at the runway now. Shut your engine down. I thought, oh man, this is bad. And so I shut the engine down, and this truck came out, and this guy came up, and I opened the little window, and he said, we found this in the ground where your plane was. And I said, oh, that's great. That's a gift for you. I left it as a gift. The only other time was when one of my friends was having dinner with somebody out in Colorado. They were mountain climbers. And in the middle of their dining room table, they had a planet, and my friend said, where'd you get that planet? And they said, we found this. It was on the top of Mount McKinley, Mount Denali in Alaska. It was stuffed in a crack in the rocks. And I hadn't even put that there, but they had brought it back, but they didn't know who had made it. It just had the infinity symbol. So those are the two times that I know about. Who's next?
Michael.
So you say you do a marble project, like how about the other glass project, like stained glass or other glass projects?
I do many different things out of glass. I mean, I do make vases and bowls and plates. My plates are pretty large. They're meant to look like Hubble Space or James Webb Telescope photos. And if you look at them, that's really the sense you get. That's the feeling you get from them. And I have made stained glass by heating glass up and pouring glass through steel rollers, but I have not actually made too much stained glass in the traditional way. I think we might.
One more question, and then
Yeah.
I'll give you a gift. And,
Oh.
we'll call, Harry. Here we go.
So, could the planet you envision eventually break?
Well, they shouldn't break, because first of all, it's a marble. Have you ever tried to break a marble? If you try to break a marble, it takes a huge amount of effort. You can hit it with a hammer and nothing, it just ricochets off your hammer. Actually, I'll tell you a secret. If you want to break them, you can put them in a frying pan for a while and then dump them in cold water. That'll do it. But that doesn't happen out in the forest usually, or buried in the ocean, or buried somewhere. I have a good sense that many of these will be intact for many years, hundreds, maybe more than hundreds, who knows? Thousands, possible. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you.
Gift, a little